My name is Calla Everett, and for a long time, I believed in justice. The clean kind, the kind printed on parchment and sealed with crimson wax. The kind that came from scholarships earned, degrees pursued, lives changed. But that was before I learned about the other kind, the kind you build yourself, the kind that comes after everything's been taken from you. And it all started with my sister. I didn't expect the letter. It was a Thursday morning, March. Late frost still clung to the ground like it had something to prove. I was in the kitchen of our two-bedroom flat in York, sipping the weak tea my mother insisted was good for the nerves, when I spotted the post. The envelope was thick, linen-textured, embossed with the crest of the University of Ashbourne. I knew the crest by heart, had printed it out, taped it to my vision board, dreamt about it for years. My fingers trembled as I slid it open. "Dear Miss Everett," it began, with the confidence only institutions have, "we regret to inform you. No. After thorough review of your application materials." My hands went numb. "We are unable to offer you the Ashbourne Scholars Grant." The words blurred. I felt the breath knock out of me like someone had slammed a door in my chest. I'd done everything right. Perfect grades. The letter of recommendation from Dr. Smythe, the publishing credits, the volunteer work, the mock interviews, the essay revisions, countless nights drafting and redrafting until my eyes burned. "Maybe they made a mistake," Mum said, gently patting my hand. But her face was tight. We both knew this wasn't the kind of grant that got reconsidered. They didn't do second chances. And then I remembered something. The essay. I'd left a printout in the study. It had gone missing a week ago, and I'd assumed it was just misplaced. My sister Lila had been in there that day. The same sister who had always scoffed at my dreams of academia. "You really think someone like you is going to get in with those shoes and that cheap haircut?" she'd said just a month ago. I laughed it off then. She always jabbed. But now, something cold was crawling up my spine. I went to the study, opened the drawer where I kept backups. The USB drive I always used was gone. My stomach twisted. Later that night, I logged into my email to draft a request for clarification, just something to give me closure. I needed to know what went wrong. And there, in my inbox, was a message from a friend on the scholarship board. "Calla, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be telling you this, but your application was flagged for plagiarism?" Plagiarism. I froze. The essay I wrote alone, in my room, over 2 months. That essay. The next morning, I confronted Lila. She didn't deny it. "You think you're better than me," she said, coolly applying lip gloss in our shared mirror. "You always have. I just evened the field." She had submitted my essay anonymously to an online forum. It was still there, time-stamped, a full week before I submitted my application. My world tilted. I saw red. But worse than the rage was the betrayal. Lila had been my sister, my family. "Why?" was all I could whisper. She looked me dead in the eye. "Because if you left, Mum would be alone with me. Because I'm tired of living in your shadow. Because no one ever talks about what Qua want." Mum didn't believe me at first. Lila was always the charming one, the pretty one, the one who cried on cue. But I showed her the forum post, the metadata, the timestamp. And Mum finally saw what I did. Still, the damage was done. The grant was gone. My spot at Ashbourne, conditional upon that funding, was withdrawn. My dreams, all wrapped up in neat paper bows, unraveled in an instant. I cried for 3 days straight. Then I stopped. Because grief wasn't going to change anything. But plans might. I took a job. Or 3. Barista in the mornings. Library assistant in the afternoons. Ghostwriter for a resume site at night. I worked until my knuckles swelled and my eyes dried out. I saved every penny. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about rebuilding. Brick by excruciating brick. I got into a local college. Less prestigious, yes, but I graduated early. Took a job in London. Started working with an education charity that specialized in micro-endowments. That's when the idea struck me. If I couldn't win the scholarship, I could become the kind of person who gave them. It took 5 years. 5 years of sleepless nights, ramen dinners, and strategic networking, but finally I had the means and the name to make something big. I created the Everett Fellowship. And I made the first endowment in the name of Lila Everett. A full scholarship, granted annually to a first-generation student pursuing literature or education. I sent the press release to every local outlet. Included a picture of me, shaking hands with the Ashbourne dean. Lila saw it the next day. She called, screaming, "How dare you use my name?" I let her rage, let her spit and threaten. Then I said, "Congratulations, you finally gave someone else a future." But that wasn't the end. Because what I didn't know was that Lila had been planning something else. Something that would make my scholarship retaliation look like child's play. And I was about to walk straight into it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The call came just after midnight, a week later. A clipped voice. Professional. The kind that usually starts with, "We regret to inform you." "Miss Everett? This is Pauline with the Ashbourne Advancement Office. I'm calling in regard to the endowment paperwork. There's been a complication." I sat up, heart pounding. What sort of complication? "We've had a formal complaint filed against the use of the name Lila Everett. The claimant asserts you used it without permission for personal gain." Personal gain? I nearly laughed. "Can you tell me who submitted it?" "I'm afraid I can't, not until legal reviews are complete. But it's causing some concern." They paused. I could hear papers rustling. "Until this is resolved, the fellowship will be placed on hold." I stared into the dark. Lila, of course. She had found a way to drag her name's weight like an anchor around mine again. But I wasn't the same girl she'd stolen from before. I had lawyers now, connections, a voice, and I was going to use every one of them. I answered the phone before the third ring, my mind already racing through possibilities: legal hold, suspension, a smear campaign. But what Pauline said next was worse. "Miss Everett, the complaint alleges that Lila Everett is a living person, not a historical figure or estate, and that using her name for an endowed scholarship without her explicit consent constitutes a violation of charitable trust and personal rights." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "She's my sister. I have her consent by default." There was a long pause. I could almost hear the cogs turning on the other end. "I'm sorry, but until this is resolved in court or through arbitration, the award cannot be conferred, nor can any funds be distributed. Nothing matters until it's official, until it's on paper." I ended the call and stared at the ceiling of my tiny flat. The walls seemed to close in, but I refused to panic. I'd come too far. I opened my laptop. First order: find the filing party. Figure out who filed the complaint. I couldn't get names from Ashbourne, but I could search public records. I knew the process. Complaints like this had to be filed with the Charity Commission and the UK Intellectual Property Office. I stayed up half the night combing through public registries, cross-referencing lawyers' names, digging deeper into the networks of nonprofit governance. I flagged a name: Eleanor Finch, partner at Finch & Green Solicitors. She specialized in personal rights and defamation. That had to be the firm. Next, dig into Finch & Green. I checked their website, hit the LinkedIn profiles of every solicitor and paralegal. There was a fluorescent note against Finch herself. She'd represented high-profile clients in cases of unauthorized use of personal names and likenesses. If she was involved, this was serious. I drafted an email to Eleanor Finch herself, the kind of email that didn't hint desperation. Professional, firm. I laid out the facts. Gavin Everett, decedent, had specified in his will that scholarships could be endowed in the family name, without geographic or generational limits. Lila Everett was less than forthcoming. She had been served notice of the endowment, and given repeated opportunities to object or consent before it was finalized, none of which she had pursued until she felt slighted. Sent. I waited. Then I reached out to my own counsel. I'd kept Eleanor Hayes on retainer ever since the scholarship launch. A top-notch nonprofit attorney whose retainer fee was more than I made in a month, but worth every penny. I called her at 2:34 a.m. Hayes, I need your help. Now. The next hour was a blur of legalese and strategy. Immediate cease and desist letters, protective filings, emergency motions to lift the hold. Hayes was confident. We would fight this. I could almost feel the momentum shifting. Morning light crept through the curtains when I finally put my head to the pillow. 2 hours later, I was back at the computer, this time drafting a press release of my own. Everett Fellowship, backed by the legacy of Gavin Everett's will. Legal challenges without merit. It was bold, it was public, it was a calculated risk. I hit send. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. Social media had caught fire. The hashtag #DefendTheEverett Fellowship, trended among student activists and charitable lovers. Headlines across local outlets: Sister versus Sister, a legal battle over a scholarship, and Family Drama or Public Good? You decide. One op-ed by a student blogger read, "At a time when education funding is shrinking, we can't afford to lose scholarships to family feuds." I sat back and smiled. It wasn't enough to fight in the courtroom. I needed the court of public opinion. Lila called again, her voice shaking. "Kala, you can't do this." "Oh, but I can, Lila." The words rolled off my tongue like steel. "Because it's the right thing to do." She hung up. Sweet victory. Days passed in a haze of court orders and press interviews. I flew back to York to meet with Mum. She hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My girl," she whispered, "you've done something incredible." I kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning." Back in London, the case was moving faster than I expected. Eleanor Finch responded with a scathing letter accusing me of harassing her client and inflaming the public. She demanded an apology and withdrawal of all statements. Hayes filed our emergency injunction to lift the hold and compel arbitration. We won. The scholarship would proceed on schedule. But Lila wasn't done. One morning, I arrived at the office to find my desk cleared. My assistant told me, "I'm sorry, Kala, but they're calling off the fellowship from this year's cohort." Called off? How? Despite the injunction? I rushed to the boardroom. The director of the charity looked at me, pity in his eyes. "We've been informed of multiple complaints. Other students are concerned about the integrity of the scholarship, the conflict of interest, claims of nepotism. We can't risk our reputation." It was the same old tactic. Smear, delay, deflate. I refused to let it stand. I mobilized. I called the student activists. I organized a rally at Ashbourne. I arranged interviews with national news outlets. And through it all, I never lost my composure. I watched as the story shifted, from scandal to success to injustice to triumph. The day of the arbitration hearing arrived. I entered the room in a crisp navy suit, standing shoulder to shoulder with Hayes and my father's executor. Lila sat across from me, face pale, eyes defiant. The arbitrator read the will's language aloud. "Any member of the Everett lineage, living or posthumous, shall have the right to endow a scholarship in the family name, subject only to committee approval and donor intent." He paused. "Ms. Everett, do you contend that the use of your sister's name in good faith violates any provision of this clause?" "No, sir," I replied. "I contend that it fulfills the donor's intent, and that my sister was fully informed and chose to object only after the gift was formalized." Lila sputtered. Finch tried to interject, but the arbitrator silenced her. "I find the objection unfounded, and award the endowment as written. The scholarship will proceed immediately." I exhaled. The room seemed to brighten. But as I rose from my seat, I noticed Lila's lips curl into a small, feral smile. She had lost the arbitration. She had burned every bridge. Yet she still wasn't finished. And as I walked out of the hearing room, the weight on my shoulders felt heavier than ever. I was no longer the young woman who had dreamed of parchment and wax. I was a force. And the storm I was about to unleash would redefine the meaning of justice. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. No, that stage had long since passed. But because I was already writing my next move. Lila thought she could corner me with technicalities, with manufactured outrage and a paper-thin legal pretense. But she didn't understand the strength I'd built in the quiet trenches of my rebuilding years. By morning, I had a binder full of affidavits, emails, time-stamped documents, and a drafted rebuttal from my legal team. Hayes was already on the phone with Ashbourne's advancement office, pushing for immediate arbitration. But I knew Lila. And I knew this wasn't about paperwork. It was about dragging me down publicly. Again. So I turned on the camera. I wasn't a social media star. I'd never had more than 300 followers on any platform. But that morning, I sat at my small desk by the window, natural light soft on my face, and I told the truth. My name is Calla Everett. 5 years ago, my scholarship was revoked under false accusations. The source of that accusation was my own sister. Last week, I launched a fellowship in her name, not out of revenge, but out of the belief that redemption can come from creating opportunity. Today, she filed a legal challenge against that scholarship, claiming harm. I paused, looked directly into the lens. So I ask you, what harm is there in helping someone else succeed? And what kind of person tries to stop that? I uploaded it. No hashtags, no edits. Just a raw, unfiltered truth. And then I went to work. By noon, the video had 12,000 views. By evening, 100,000. Overnight, 1 million. The comments flooded in like a tidal wave. My sister tried to ruin my wedding. I feel this. This is what real resilience looks like. She weaponized her name. Let's make it worth something. And then came the reposts. Influencers, writers, professors, celebrities. Within 48 hours, the Everett Fellowship had its own GoFundMe, started by a student group I didn't even know. Donations poured in from around the world. £23,000, then £58,000, then £112,000. Ashbourne couldn't ignore that kind of public momentum, and Lila couldn't either. She went on a podcast, said I was exploiting family trauma for clout, said I had always been jealous of her looks, her charisma, her freedom, that she never asked for the spotlight I threw her into. I didn't respond, because I didn't have to. The story had outgrown both of us. But Lila, true to form, didn't know when to stop. A week later, just as the arbitration panel was preparing to rule in my favor, she dropped her nuclear option. She leaked private emails. Not just between us, between me and Hayes, between me and early donors, between me and Mum. She framed them to make me look cold, calculating, ruthless. It almost worked. For a moment, the tide shifted. People who had once cheered began asking harder questions. Is this woman using philanthropy for revenge? Was the fellowship ever really about helping others, or just punishing her sister? The noise was deafening. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the sea. Just outside Whitby, where the cliffs stand like old sentinels against the wind, I parked the car and walked to the edge, let the salt air sting my face, let the gulls scream into the void. I thought of everything I'd built, and everything Lila had tried to unbuild. And then I thought of a girl named Zahara. She had been the first applicant to the Everett Fellowship, a 17-year-old daughter of Syrian immigrants who wanted to be a teacher. Her essay had made me cry. It reminded me why I started all this in the first place. I went home. I opened my inbox. Zara's final documents had just come in. I sent them to Ashbourne myself. I don't care what name is on the check, I wrote. Fund her. Then I picked up the phone. I called a journalist I trusted. I gave her everything. The story, the feud, the emails, the footage, the truth. It ran the next day. Calla Everett, the woman WHO, turned a family betrayal into a movement. It was the most read article on The Guardian for 4 days straight. Ashbourne's board met that Friday. I was asked to join via Zoom. There were 22 faces on the screen. The dean spoke first. Miss Everett, after a full review, we found no breach of policy, ethics, or intent. The Everett Fellowship is not only reinstated, it is to be made permanent, and Zara Khan will be its first recipient. I exhaled slowly, blinked back the tears. Thank you, I whispered. But then the dean continued. Furthermore, we'd like to invite you to join Ashbourne's Donor Advisory Council. Your perspective and your courage are precisely what higher education needs. And that was the moment I realized. Lila had tried to write me out of the story. But I had become the author. That night, my inbox pinged again. A message from Mum. It was short. She's gone. I stared. What do you mean? I called. Mum answered on the first ring. She packed her things, left a note, didn't say where she was going. Gone. No forwarding address, no apology, just vanished. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. Not because Lila had disappeared, but because I no longer needed her to stay. The future I was building didn't require her approval, or her presence, or her name. It required me. It required Zahra. It required every girl who had ever been told she didn't belong. And we were going to keep building. One scholarship at a time. One name at a time. Even if none of those names were Everett. I didn't expect to see her again. For 6 months, there was no trace of Lila. Her bank account sat idle. Her socials had vanished. Mom said she'd called once from a burner number. No details, just a vague, "I'm fine, don't look for me." It should have been enough. I told myself it was. But the human heart doesn't operate on logic. Closure is a myth invented by people who don't understand betrayal. The fellowship was thriving. Zahra had completed her first term at Ashbourne and was already working with local refugee tutoring programs. 3 new donors joined the council. I was giving talks at other universities, talking about access and ethics and the long tail of family sabotage. Every time I stood at a podium, I pretended I didn't feel her shadow. Until I saw her. It was January, a conference in Edinburgh. I'd just finished a panel when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, expecting a student, maybe a professor. It was Lila. Her hair was shorter, darker. Her clothes more muted than I'd ever seen them. No jewelry, no flair, just a battered coat, and the same unreadable expression I remembered from that mirror 5 years ago. "Can we talk?" she asked. Every muscle in my body said no, but I nodded. We found a quiet bench outside, the wind tearing through the courtyard. "You're here for the conference?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I saw your name in the program. I've been nearby." I stared at her. "Why?" She rubbed her fingers together like she was trying to conjure warmth. "Because I needed to see you. Because I needed to say something." I waited. I wouldn't help her. Not this time. Lila swallowed. "I was cruel to you. I ruined your shot. I lied, and then I tried to tear down what you built. I know it doesn't matter now, but I was lost. I felt invisible, and I thought, if I couldn't be the one shining, I could at least turn off your light." I said nothing. She looked up. "I'm sorry, Kala, I really am." The wind howled. I tasted sea salt in the air. "You disappeared for 6 months. You nuked my life. Twice. And now you're sorry?" "Yes, I am." I thought about saying more, justifying it, but there's no justification. I stared at her, this stripped-down version of the girl who used to weaponize smiles. There were shadows under her eyes. The hard edge in her voice had dulled. "I don't forgive you," I said. "Not yet, maybe not ever, but I appreciate the apology." She nodded, as if that was all she expected. "What now?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "That's up to you. I just needed to say the words." And then she walked away. No fanfare, no theatrics. Just left. And for the first time, I realized the story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what came next. Spring came quickly that year. The Everett Fellowship expanded to 5 scholars. I partnered with an inner-city education trust to mentor applicants. Zahra wrote a feature piece for The Guardian, calling the fellowship a, quote between rage and resilience. I cried when I read it. And then came the call that changed everything. "Kala, it's Vice Chancellor Hathaway. We'd like you to consider an honorary doctorate from Ashbourne." for services to educational access. I was speechless. You want the girl you rejected? He chuckled. We didn't reject you, Kala. We failed you. There's a difference. And we'd like to make it right. In June, I stood on the same campus that once slammed its gates in my face and received a ceremonial hood. Mum sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes. Zara stood and clapped before anyone else. And just before I stepped off the stage, I saw a flash of movement. Lila. Back row, standing, clapping. And crying. We didn't speak. But we didn't have to. Not everything needs to be rewritten. Some chapters just close on their own. That summer, I was approached by the Ministry of Education. We're forming a new council, the secretary said, to address structural inequality in higher education funding. We want you to chair it. It felt surreal, me, the girl who almost didn't make it. But I said yes. I spent the next 8 months interviewing students, compiling data, proposing reforms. I wrote white papers and legislation. I testified in Parliament. I stood where few women from working-class backgrounds ever stood. And I made sure no one forgot who I was. I was Kala Everett, the girl whose sister stole her future, and then watched her rebuild it stronger. One afternoon, Zara and I visited a school in Manchester. She was now a teaching assistant, glowing with confidence. A girl raised her hand. Miss Everett, can I start a scholarship one day too? I smiled. Of course, anyone can. It starts with wanting to help someone else cross a bridge you had to build yourself. Zara added, and never let someone else decide what you're capable of. I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. This was the legacy. Not the feud, not the betrayal, but the work. The names on applications, the letters of joy, the tears of parents who never thought their child could go to university. I went home that night and updated the fellowship site. New tagline, forged in fire, built for others. And a new note on the homepage. In honor of every sister who ever lost her way. In service to every girl who still needs one. Quote, 3 months later, I found myself sitting across from a man in a mahogany-paneled boardroom, the kind where old oil portraits stared down from the walls like they had opinions. He had just offered me a seat on the Royal Commission for Educational Innovation, a decades-old body that usually favored retired heads of colleges and men named something like Basil or Alistair. You're younger than most we've considered, he said, smoothing his silk tie, and considerably more vocal. Is that a problem? I asked. He leaned back. It's why you're here. And just like that, another door opened. That same week, I got a letter. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, in handwriting that felt like a ghost. Inside, a note. You turned ashes into architecture. I see that now. Mostra L. I didn't frame it. I didn't respond. But I didn't throw it away either. Because there are some things you don't keep for forgiveness. You keep them to remember who you survived. The following autumn, I launched a second initiative, Bridgefire, a startup charity incubator dedicated to helping first-gen students fund passion projects that blended public service and education. Think scholarships for future policy researchers, grants for teaching artists, fellowships for curriculum designers from underrepresented backgrounds. It wasn't just about tuition anymore. It was about voice. Zahar joined as my co-director. She handled outreach. I handled policy. Together, we built a team of 10 by the end of the year. We got a grant from the Bernadine Foundation, a write-up in Forbes, a podcast feature with a guest host who cried on air after hearing our story. And in the middle of all this, another letter, typed this time. Dear Miss Everett, I am writing on behalf of the trustees of the Crown Regent Education Fund. We would like to recognize your efforts with a discretionary award of £250,000 to be used at your sole discretion toward advancement of inclusive educational initiatives. $250,000. I sat very still, then I laughed, then I cried. That night I hosted the first real dinner party of my life. Zahra made lamb pilaf. My mom brought sticky toffee pudding. We toasted with elderflower cordial and talked about legacy. And then, just before midnight, Zahra said, "You know you're going to have to forgive her eventually." I didn't answer right away. Maybe, but she's not the chapter I'm writing anymore. Zahra tilted her head. Then write a better one. In February, the education minister invited me to an advisory dinner. The room was all soft jazz and colder nods, wine glasses, folders thick with briefing notes. "Miss Everett," a deputy said with a forced smile, "your policy papers are causing quite a stir." "Good. Education should stir." He blinked. I moved on. The minister spoke for 20 minutes about budget constraints, testing reforms, and parental involvement. Then he turned to me. "Kala, what would you do given the keys?" I stood. "I'd fund stories." They blinked. Not just scholarships, but the stories of the people receiving them. I'd mandate that every school receiving federal aid must dedicate part of its year to student-led storytelling, because numbers tell you where you are, stories tell you who. Asterisk. Silence. Then slow clapping. From one of the older heads of faculty, then another. The minister nodded. "Let's talk." Within 2 months, Bridgefire Asterisk launched the Every Name Aflame campaign, a nationwide initiative to spotlight one fellowship recipient per month across major media platforms. Billboards, TV spots, web documentaries, a podcast. The first feature? Zahra. She told the world about her family's journey, her fears, her belief that Kala Everett changed her life. And at the end of the episode, she said, "Everyone deserves a Kala. But more importantly, everyone predetain sen can be Zakala. You just have to choose what kind of light you'll leave behind." We hit 1.2 million downloads in the first week. And then, the day I thought would never come, Lila reached out. Not a note, not a text, not a podcast rant. An email. Subject line, a proposal. My heart thudded once, then again. I clicked. Kala. I've been volunteering at a rehabilitation center in South London. Not the glamorous kind, but the kind that needs pencils and window repairs. We just lost our grant funding, and one of the teens, Jordy, asked me why nobody like him ever gets a shot. I told him about you, about the fellowship. He said that's not for people like me. I don't want that to be true. Would Bridgefire Asterisk consider doing a micro-fund for vocational students in urban programs? If yes, I'll match the first £5,000. Quietly, anonymously, no name needed. You don't even have to reply. But if you do, thank you. L. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I replied, "Dear Lila, yes, for Jordy. No skate meets, see?" We launched the pilot 2 weeks later, nose hands forward. 10 grants, vocational support, no essays, just a pitch and a plan. The day we announced it, Lila didn't show her face, but a donation came through. £7,500. I knew it was her. I didn't mention it. 3 months later, she showed up at a vocational showcase, standing in the back row while Jordy presented his project, a self-sustaining urban greenhouse using recycled tech. He finished. The crowd clapped. Lila's eyes shone. When the lights dimmed, I felt her approach. "He's going to change the world, isn't he?" she whispered. "Maybe more than we ever did," I said. She smiled, not sad, not smug, just human. "I'm glad I wrote." "Me too." We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but when we left, we walked out side by side. Not healed, not whole, but maybe starting. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all. By the time the national election rolled around, Bridgefire Asterisk had funded 48 microgrants, enrolled 11 new partner schools, and launched its first regional mentoring hub. I barely had time to breathe. And I didn't want to. Momentum is a kind of protection. If you keep moving, the past can't grab your ankle. But one night the stillness caught up with me. I was filing donor reports at midnight when my mom texted, Times asterisk, turn on channel 4. Now, asterisk. I did. A panel debate was underway. Education policy, campaign promises, and there she was. Lila. On live TV. She was sitting at the far right of the panel, a small black microphone clipped to her jacket, speaking with a quiet steadiness that made the audience lean in. And I think the problem is, we conflate punishment with accountability. Just because someone made a mistake doesn't mean they're incapable of contributing to the solution. I sat frozen. The host nodded. You're speaking from experience? Lila smiled gently. Oh, I sabotaged my own sister's scholarship application when I was 19. And now I help run vocational grants for at-risk youth. Life is long, and growth is real. The studio went still. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then all. I exhaled. When the program ended, my inbox had already started blinking. Was that your sister on telly? Kala, did you know she was going public? You two should do a joint talk. Imagine the press. I ignored most of them, but one stuck. Kala, I'm a student journalist. I'd like to write about sisters who find their way back to one another, even after everything. Would you give me 5 minutes? We did the interview together, Leela and me. In a small university radio studio with bad coffee and bright fluorescent lighting. The student reporter, Abby, was barely 20 and completely fearless. She began, so, how do two people who went from sabotage to reconciliation now run programs side by side? I glanced at Lila. She nodded. You start by not pretending it was ever simple, I said. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. Lila added, and sometimes you have to prove you're not the same person anymore before you ask to be welcomed back. The interview went viral. More than the TED Talk I'd done a year earlier, more than the keynote at Oxford. Because people love redemption. Especially when it's messy. Especially when it's true. Over the next year, Lila and I co-founded Flint and Feather, a joint initiative focused on dual-track education, pathways that allowed students to move fluidly between academic and vocational learning without stigma. Not everyone's road is a straight one, Lila said at our launch event. Some of the best journeys zigzag. It caught fire. The Department for Education requested a policy brief. A publishing house offered us a joint book deal. Lila declined. Not yet. It's your story, Kala. But I knew better. The next chapter had both our fingerprints. And then one day, the past came back in a letter that smelled faintly of mildew and ink. It was from the University of Ashbourne. They were retiring the Taunus Ashbourne Scholars Grant. In light of institutional realignment and shifting priorities, we will be sunsetting the program permanently. I stared at the words. This was the scholarship that started it all. The grant I lost. The grant that was used as a weapon. The ghost of everything that broke me. And it was ending? I didn't expect the grief. But I also didn't expect what happened next. Lila proposed we bid for the remaining funds. Let's make a case to redirect the final balance to * Bridgefire. Endings can become beginnings. I laughed. Are we really rewriting history now? She smiled. We're not rewriting, we're reclaiming. We spent 2 weeks drafting our pitch. We called it Time the Full Circle Fund. A final tribute to every student who ever got lost between the lines. When the committee reviewed it, they cried. Literally. One member wiped his glasses and said, if this had existed 30 years ago, my brother might still be alive. We were awarded the remainder of the fund. £138,000. And with it, we launched a new program dedicated to students who had previously been rejected by major awards. Their applications were revisited, their voices finally heard. We called them Tom Phoenix Fellows, because sometimes the best fire comes after ruin. The next summer, I stood on the stage at Ashbourne again, this time to present the first Phoenix Fellowship Award. The recipient was a shy boy named Isaac, whose original application had been rejected for, quote, lack of leadership experience. He now ran a peer mentoring program in his housing estate. He shook my hand, blinking back tears. And in that moment, I didn't see the boardroom, or the rejection letter, or the USB drive that disappeared. I saw my bedroom desk, the one where I wrote that first essay, the one Lila stole, the one that started everything. I whispered, "This one's for her." Isaac looked confused. I smiled. And then the cameras flashed. That autumn, I gave a speech in Parliament. Not behind closed doors, not at a subcommittee briefing, but on the main floor, live-streamed, broadcast on national television, covered by the BBC. My nameplate said, Ms. Calla Everett, Executive Director, Bridgefire. Under it sat pages of notes I barely needed. I stood tall. When I was 17, I lost a scholarship due to false plagiarism accusations. I worked 3 jobs, rebuilt my future, and created an initiative to fund those who fell through the cracks. The system failed me, but it doesn't have to keep failing the next girl, or the one after her. Silence. Then the chair of the Education Select Committee leaned forward. "And your proposal, Miss Everett? Make every government-backed university program report not just how many students they accept, but how many they fail, how many they overlook. Then fund partnerships with grassroots organizations to meet those gaps." The motion passed into policy discussion that very week. Lila and I were invited to the Royal Garden Party that spring. I wore a deep green dress. She wore navy. We matched in different hues. A duchess asked us about our work. Lila smiled with all her teeth. "We specialize in phoenixes," I added, "and fires that don't burn people, but build them." "'Tis." In June, we got an email from a girl named Misha. "Dear Ms. Everett, I don't know if this inbox is monitored, but I wanted to tell you something. I used to think scholarships weren't for people like me. I was rejected from 4. I almost gave up. Then I heard your story. Then I applied for the Phoenix Fellowship. Then I got in. And now I'm building a tutoring app that uses AI to help dyslexic students learn at their own pace. Thank you for showing me that the cracks in the system could become the spaces where light gets in. Love. Misha." I printed the letter and taped it above my desk. Not because I needed validation, but because sometimes survival feels better when it's shared. Mom started dating again. A gentleman named Arthur, who brought her flowers from his allotment and read poetry over tea. He met Lila first. "She's not who she was," Mom told me on the phone. "Neither am I," I replied. He met me next. At a family dinner where everyone wore too much cologne and overcooked the potatoes. "Calla," he said, shaking my hand, "you built something from less than nothing." "That takes a spine of steel," Mom grinned, "and a heart of gold." I blushed and realized, for the first time, that I didn't feel like a broken girl pretending to be whole. I felt real. Lila proposed we do a joint fellowship trip to the U.S. A conference on sibling-led educational startups was being held at Stanford. She booked the flights. I packed the folders, we argued about shoes, and then we went. In California, we presented our story in a sunlit auditorium full of strangers who already knew everything about us. They asked questions. "How do you stay sisters after so much history?" Lila answered first. "By choosing not to let the worst thing between us become the only thing." I added, "And by building something bigger than our past." They stood, applauded, someone sobbed. A foundation director offered us $1 million partnership right there in the lobby. We said we'd think about it. Back home, Zara was waiting. She'd taken on a new role, head of storytelling for Bridgefire. Her first campaign? Origin doesn't define outcome. She interviewed scholars, mentors, parents, and then she asked to interview us. "You want to profile the founders?" I asked. "I want to profile the sisters, the whole story." We sat in front of her camera for 2 hours. Lila cried when she talked about the essay. I cried when I read the original, recovered draft out loud. And Zara cried just because we did. The documentary aired on Channel 5. It broke records. Then came the letter from Ashbourne. The same crest. Same linen paper. Miss Everett, we are pleased to inform you that the university will be naming our new Center for Access and Equity in your honor. The Calla Everett Center will serve as a hub for inclusive scholarship, mentorship, and opportunity. I read the letter 3 times. Then I called Lila. They want to name a building after me. It's about time, she said. I laughed. Then we cried. The day of the naming ceremony, Mum wore a plum fascinator. Arthur held her hand. Zara gave the keynote. Lila stood beside me. I didn't speak about the betrayal, or the lawsuit, or the years lost. I spoke about the next 10 years. We'll fund 100 Phoenix Fellows. We'll build labs, classrooms, bridges. We'll write policies that won't just fix education, they'll reimagine it. The plaque was unveiled. The Calla Everett Center for every girl who was told she couldn't. And underneath, in smaller type, with thanks to Ellie for starting the fire. The crowd gasped, then clapped, then cried. Lila held my hand, didn't let go. And in that moment I knew. We were both still healing. But we were no longer hurt alone. By the following winter, we'd officially outgrown the old Bridgefire office. The walls were too thin, the ceiling leaked during hard rain, and every morning Zara had to kick the radiator 3 times before it started humming. So we moved into a space above a refurbished library in Islington, a quiet, sunlit corner of the city with ivy on the brickwork and students spilling onto the green. The lease was funded by the Misha Trust. Yes, try that, Misha. She'd turned her tutoring app into a fully funded edtech startup. Her first act of philanthropy? Donating £200,000 to Bridgefire. You gave me a hand, she told me. Now I'll build ladders. That quote ended up etched on a glass panel above the new reception desk. Ladders, not walls. In February, we launched a new program, Reclaimers. Not size. It was born out of a single email from a man named Darren, who had been expelled from university years ago after a mental health crisis. His records haunted him. Every job application stalled. Every conversation about ambition choked. I'm not asking for sympathy, he wrote, just a second chance. Reclaimers gave it to him, and others like him. We funded legal help for expunging minor academic infractions, offered therapy stipends, re-entry coaching. Darren eventually went on to co-write a mental health curriculum for secondary schools. We hired him. Lila called the program a love letter to every person the system forgot to remember. But not everything was easy. That spring, we lost a major grant, a change in government priorities. Too radical, they said. Too many gray zones. We had to pause hands forward. Lila was devastated. That was our most practical program. We'll rebuild it, I promised. But privately, I stayed late every night, poring over spreadsheets and grant applications until my vision blurred. I hadn't felt this kind of pressure since I was 19. One night, Zara sat beside me, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. You can rest, you know, she said. The world won't fall apart. If I rest, we lose a cohort. If you break, we lose you, asterisk. I didn't cry, but I let her sit with me until the room softened. By summer, new funders came, unexpected ones. Former Phoenix Fellows, parents of applicants, a group of retired teachers who pooled their pensions. Hands Forward returned, twice the size. Lila and I created a new initiative in their honor, Backers Circle. Donors didn't just give, they mentored, they hosted workshops, they became family. Our youngest fellow, Anaya, said it best. This is the first time in my life I've believed someone wants me to succeed, not just expects me to. Then came the invitation. The United Nations Educational Council, Geneva. Miss Everett, we would like you to keynote our global summit on education equity. I called Lila the moment I hung up. You're coming, I said. Only if you let me carry your notes. We flew together. The speech took place in a glass-walled hall overlooking the Rhone. I stood at the podium, my fingers steady. Equity isn't charity, it's infrastructure. You don't gift it, you build it. And you build it by listening to the ones who've lived without it. When I finished, no one clapped immediately. They stood first. Then they clapped. Later, a delegate from India approached. Miss Everett, we're launching a fellowship in your name, for girls in rural villages. They've already chosen the name. Kala Blossoms, asterisk. I blinked back tears. What does it mean to them? He smiled. A flower that blooms even in ash. That night, back at the hotel, Lila gave me a gift. A small velvet box. Inside, the USB drive. That asterisk USB drive. I stared at it, my chest tightened. Where did you? I kept it. I don't know why, but it's yours. I think it always was. I closed the box. Thank you. We didn't talk about it again. But the next morning, I wrote something new on my whiteboard back at the office. The same tools used to destroy you can become the tools you use to rebuild. By autumn, Bridgefire had tripled in staff. We had fellows on 5 continents. The Phoenix program became a model adopted by universities in Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa. But the most surprising success came from Letters Unsent, a quiet little project Zara proposed, an anonymous digital archive where students could write letters to the people who doubted them. Letters they never intended to send. The site went viral. Within weeks, it had over 1.4 million submissions. Some were angry, some healing, some heartbreaking. Dear admissions officer who said I had no spark, I'm now an engineer building satellites. Dear Mum, I forgive you. Dear self, I knew you could. We printed a selection into a book, called it Dom's Ladders, Not Walls. It sold out in 48 hours. 2 weeks after Ladders, Not Walls hit its 3rd printing, we received an unexpected invitation. A private reception at Buckingham Palace. Honors list, it said. Confidential until publication. I reread the letter 5 times. Then I handed it to Lila. She blinked. Is this what I think it is? It's not a prank, I checked, twice. She smiled slowly. Dame Calla Everett has a nice ring to it. I laughed. We don't know what it is yet. And even if it is a damehood, I didn't do this alone. She gave me a look. No, you didn't. But you walked through the fire first. You lit the torch. I still didn't believe it until we walked into the grand ballroom, and a staffer with a name badge whispered, Honorary registration that way, Miss Everett. Later that night, standing beside a glass of elderflower cordial I couldn't bring myself to sip, I watched Lila speak with a barrister, her gestures gentle, elegant, measured. She saw me watching. You still think I'm going to knock over the teapot, don't you? Only a little. She nudged my shoulder. You can take the girl out of the sabotage, but not the sabotage out of the girl. I raised a brow. Not funny. A little funny. 3 weeks later, it was announced I was to be awarded an OBE for services to educational equity and public access. Mum cried. Arthur bought a new blazer. Zara made a slideshow. Lila framed the letter. At the investiture, I wore a soft blue suit, the kind I'd never imagined for myself. The Queen Consort pinned the badge just above my heart. Your work has transformed lives, she said. I replied, it transformed mine first. In the months that followed, Lila took on more public speaking. She found a rhythm, a voice all her own, less fiery than mine, but deeper, quieter, more personal. Audiences leaned in. Journalists softened. Old classmates from secondary school reached out with letters of regret and apology. She never shared them, but I saw the weight shift in her shoulders. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift you give once. It's a language you learn to speak over time. That spring, I was invited to guest lecture at Harvard. Zara insisted I take the whole week off. Go, be academic, eat overpriced salad. Lila offered to join, but I declined. This one's for me. She smiled. Take the original essay with you. I didn't. But I printed out the Phoenix Fellowship Charter and read it to a room full of grad students. They asked questions, took notes. One of them stayed after to say, I used your program to get my brother out of prison and into trade school. You saved us. I said, "No, you saved him. We just built the door." Back in London, things were shifting. Mum got engaged to Arthur. Lila moved into a flat of her own, not just a space, but a sanctuary, minimalist, bright, peaceful. Zara accepted a spot on a European education task force. And I realized I wasn't quite sure what came next. Bridgefire was stable, growing, no longer mine alone, which meant, for the first time in a decade, I could slow down, but slowing down terrified me. So I did the opposite. I proposed a summit, a global gathering of formerly rejected students who had built something out of their nose. We called it the Resilience Forum. Fellows came from 22 countries. One woman had been rejected from medical school 7 times. She now ran a midwifery clinic in Ghana. A man from Poland had failed his entrance exams twice. He now taught underserved youth how to code. We cried more than we clapped. And when the final speaker, a girl named Rena from Dublin, stood up and said, "I am here because someone once said, I believe you still matter," we all stood. Every single one of us. Lila proposed we take a break. Not from each other, but from everything. "Let's disappear," she said, "just for a week." So we did. To a cottage by the Cornish coast. No laptops, no meetings, just notebooks, long walks, and bad puzzles. We talked about nonsense, and memories, and love. One night, under stars that looked hand-drawn, I asked her, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't done it?" She didn't ask what I meant. "Sometimes," she said, "but I don't let myself live there. That version of me, she's a lesson, not a ghost." I nodded. And this version of us is a miracle. Back in London, I began drafting a book. Not a memoir, a guide. For students, mentors, teachers. The architecture of second chances. Each chapter was framed by a principle. 1. A closed door is not always locked. 2. Truth told early can still leave a scar. 3. Use your ashes. 4. Ladder for others. 5. Don't erase the saboteur. Teach her to build. Lila wrote the foreword. It began, "I once set fire to my sister's dreams. She used the smoke to signal others. This book is not about me, but I hope it reaches someone like the girl I used to be." It became a bestseller within a month. The months that followed were a whirlwind of translation, adaptation, and countless late-night calls. My book, The Architecture of Second Chances, had not only resonated in the UK, but found eager readers across continents. I watched as universities in India, Nigeria, and Brazil expressed interest in translating the key principles into local contexts, as grassroots organizations sought partnerships to pilot the ladder-based mentorship models, and as student movements organized peer-led workshops around the book's core philosophies. In March, Lila and I were invited to co-host a global webinar series titled From Sabotaged to Solidarity, bringing together siblings, mentors, and students from over 50 countries. We shared screens with a sister duo from Mexico who had launched a community library in their father's name, despite a painful inheritance dispute. With twin brothers in South Korea who used your essay to rebuild trust after a college acceptance mix-up. And with 2 cousins in Canada who co-founded a literacy initiative after one of them was uninvited from a prestigious award ceremony. Each conversation reminded me that the wounds of rejection could indeed become seeds of connection and shared purpose. One night, after the final session, I sat in the dark of our Islington office. Zara had gone home hours ago. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty desks. I remembered the teenager I once was, arms full of essays, bruised by a sister's betrayal, heart pounding in fear of a single rejection. And I thought about how far I'd come, not just in impact, but in self-knowledge. I'd learned to transform the very instruments of destruction into tools of creation. I'd learned that every no carried within it the spark of a new yes. But growth, I also knew, was rarely linear. That realization struck when I received a stark email from an old mentor at the educational charity where I'd started my journey. He wrote, "Kola, we've had a series of troubling reports. Some of the new community chapters are operating without sufficient oversight. Funds allocated to Phoenix Fellows in certain regions have shown discrepancies. Local partners are raising questions about accountability. I know you'll address this, but I thought you should hear it from me first." I stared at the screen. For a heartbeat, I felt the weight of it all. The international acclaim, the awards, the praise, and now the specter of mismanagement enough to threaten everything we'd built. It was the kind of crisis I'd once feared in my earliest days of rebuilding, a betrayal of trust on an institutional scale. I called Lila immediately. "We have to act fast," she said, her voice tight. "Set up an audit. Every chapter. Every penny." I spent the next week in a haze of spreadsheets and conference calls, coordinating with local treasurers and board members. Hayes helped draft a transparent review process. Zara prepared external communications to preempt rumors. And Lila, true to her newfound strength, led on-the-ground visits to affected regions, offering both accountability and support to partners in need. It was exhausting, humbling, and essential. 3 weeks later, we held a virtual press briefing. I stood at my desk, visitor chair replaced with a backdrop of our new office wing, a gallery of framed letters from fellows around the world. I opened the session. "In recent weeks, Bridgefire has uncovered inconsistencies in some of our funding processes. We take full responsibility, and we are committed to transparency and corrective action. Today we publish a full audit report, grant reinstatements where needed, and new governance measures to ensure our fellowship chapters thrive ethically and sustainably." Quote, "The flood of questions was immediate, from journalists, funders, and fellows alike. Some voices were accusatory, others grateful for the candor. We answered each with calm directness, releasing audited financials and launching a public-facing dashboard to track funds in real time. When the session ended, the relief was palpable." "We did the right thing," Lila said softly. "We did," I agreed, "but this is only the beginning." A month later, the dashboard went live, and not a single donor withdrew support. Instead, new partners reached out, impressed by our willingness to confront failure and to learn from it. That spring, Zahra and I traveled to Nairobi for the inaugural International Education Equity Forum. As I delivered the opening keynote, now seasoned by triumph and trial, I felt the unmistakable thrill of being part of something larger than myself, larger than any one person or setback. And as I scanned the audience, fellowship recipients in colorful kurtas, vocational students in denim overalls, siblings reunited in collaboration, I thought of one final principle for my growing manuscript. Asterisk, asterisk, 6. Let your failures become your clarion call. The thunderous applause that followed was not just for me, but for every person who dared to rise again. And beneath it all, I heard the echo of a dozen voices, students, mentors, policymakers, calling out, "We see you. We stand with you." My journey from sabotage to solidarity had defined my career, but it was the journey from integrity to impact, navigating the messy in-between, that defined our legacy. I closed my notes, thinking of the next horizon, a potential collaboration with UNESCO on cross-continental fellowships, a documentary series capturing the stories of Asterix letters unsent in 30 new languages, and a plan to secure an endowment that would guarantee our work for the next 50 years. And yet, as always, I came back to the same truth. Every major project begins with a simple question. What if we reevaluate the rules? Part 11 awaits. The dawn after Nairobi felt different. I woke in a Spartan guest room, soft sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains, and for the first time in years I didn't reach for my phone. Instead, I listened to the silence, an unfamiliar luxury. I was still riding the high of that keynote, the faces of fellows around the world flashing in my mind. Rena from Dublin, Darren from Manchester, Zara's own students in London. Yet beneath the triumph lay a restlessness, the echo of one simple question: what next? The answer arrived in the form of an email from UNESCO's Director of Education Initiatives. She wrote, "Dear Ms. Everett, Your call to reimagine equity has inspired us to propose a pilot cross-continental fellowship program. We envision 20 scholars, each representing one of 30 global UNESCO regions, traveling to 3 host countries to co-create educational frameworks based on local needs. Would you lead its design and implementation? My heart clenched. This was the apex of my work, a chance to scale Phoenix Fellows into a truly global network, bridging contexts from the slums of Caracas to the university towns of Kyoto. But it also meant diving headlong into political labyrinths, budget negotiations, and cultural complexities I'd never navigated before. I replied immediately, I'm honored and ready. And so began the whirlwind of planning, weeks of virtual meetings, memos, draft charters. Zara and Lila pitched in, offering frameworks for mentorship and narrative documentation. By July, we had a rough blueprint. UNESCO Bridgefire Global Cohort 1. But ambition often attracts resistance. As the pilot's profile rose, so did skepticism. The World Student Alliance published an op-ed questioning whether Western-led programs could truly serve non-Western contexts. Local NGOs in sub-Saharan Africa expressed concerns about parachute philanthropy. Even some of our own regional coordinators worried that the project might stretch Bridgefire's capacity too thin. I convened an emergency summit at our new Islington office. The sunlit atrium, once toasted by the Misha Trust, now bore the weight of global expectations. Around the long oak table sat Dr. Amara Coulibaly, head of a Mali-based nonprofit. Times Professor Sanjay Rao, education reformist from Delhi. Times Mariam El-Sheikh, a former fellow turned policy advisor in Cairo. Times and 5 more voices from South America, Eastern Europe, and the Pacific Islands. I opened with honesty. We built Phoenix Fellows on the principle that recovery from rejection requires partnership with those who know the sting best. If we want this global pilot to succeed, we must co-create it. We must listen first, establish local leadership, and ensure that every fellowship is driven by community priorities. The room dissolved into discussion, sometimes heated, always passionate. By evening, we'd agreed on a decentralized model. Each of the 30 regions would nominate 3 candidates, mentors, scholars, and community liaisons, who would form regional steering committees. Bridgefire and UNESCO would provide seed funding and logistical support, but decision-making would remain local. It was far from perfect, but it was a beginning. In September, I found myself on a red-eye to Accra, my first stop on what would become a 6-month journey across 7 continents. Lila and Zara joined me in Nairobi. From there, we split up. I went west, Lila south, Zara east. Accra was electric with possibility. I met Amina, a young teacher from a township school, who spoke of integrating solar-powered learning hubs. I met Kwame, a tech entrepreneur training former street children in coding. I listened to their stories, their frustrations, their dreams. And I realized that my role wasn't to lead, but to facilitate, to turn Bridgefire's resources into catalytic fuel for their initiatives. Each region presented unique challenges: navigating red tape in Santiago, securing visas in Istanbul, accommodating language diversity in Jakarta. There were moments of triumph, like when a remote village in Nepal requested a mobile lab for science education, and moments of heartbreak, like the forest fires in Brazil that displaced families we intended to serve. Through it all, I took nightly notes, capturing candid reflections and policy insights. I recorded interviews, built photo diaries, and wove it all into a living roadmap for educational equity. One evening in Rio, as the sky bled pink over Copacabana, I video-called Lila. "How's Cairo?" I asked. She smiled, exhaustion and exhilaration mixing in her eyes. We just finalized the pilot's community liaison structure, and I got to mentor a survivor of the Syrian conflict who's starting a therapeutic art program. It feels right. I nodded, tears stinging. We're doing it. We are. By January, we reconvened in Paris for the inaugural Global Fellowship Forum. UNESCO's HQ glittered under winter lights. Delegates from 30 regions filed into the Grand Amphitheater, each wearing symbols of their home, a handcrafted scarf, a carved wooden pin, a vibrant tatami mat. I walked to the stage beside the UNESCO director, my speech no longer about lost scholarships or sibling feuds, but about shared agency and collective responsibility. Equity is not a gift offered from on high, I said. It is the outcome of collaboration, humility, and the courage to dismantle power before reconstructing it together. When I finished, the hall erupted. Not just in applause, but in standing ovation. As I scanned the crowd, I saw the eyes of recombinant hope. Students who had once been told no, now shaping policy for their own communities. And I realized, we had become more than a charity or a network. We had become a movement. One letter, one scholarship, one phoenix at a time. I returned home in early spring to a London still damp from rain, the air heavy with the promise of new growth. My flat felt both familiar and foreign, once a refuge for my solitary ambitions, now a waypoint in a journey that had circled the globe and back. I looked around at my bookshelves, lined with memoirs and manifestos, at the stacks of manuscripts from fellows past and present, and felt the weight of history pressing on my shoulders. Part of me longed for stillness, for a moment of quiet after 11 parts of chaos, triumph, betrayal, and rebirth. But I had learned that the moment I paused, the currents of change would sweep me under. So I opened my laptop and drafted an email. Dear UNESCO colleagues, Bridfire board members, and global fellows. As we approach the final phase of our pilot cross-continental program, I invite you to contribute to the framing of our legacy. What next steps will ensure that Phoenix Fellows, and every pair of hands raised against rejection, continue to flourish? Your insights will guide our strategic planning retreat this month. With gratitude and anticipation. Calla Everett. I pressed send and leaned back, knowing that even the act of reaching out was a step into uncertainty. A week later, delegates from 5 continents arrived at our Islington headquarters for the strategic retreat. I watched them unpack their suitcases, bright fabrics from Ghana, hand-bound notebooks from Peru, a carved bamboo water bottle from Vietnam, and felt the familiar thrill of convergence. We gathered in our renovated atrium, now adorned with a kinetic sculpture by a Phoenix Fellow turned artist. I opened the session. Our work began with a single endowment, birthed from grief and determination. Today, with partners in 30 regions, we hold the power to reimagine educational equity on a global scale. But power without purpose is hollow. Let us name the purpose we will carry forward. Quote, conversations swirled around topics I had barely touched. Mental health support integrated into every fellowship, digital access for remote communities, climate resilience curricula co-designed with Indigenous educators, fellow-to-fellow exchanges beyond borders, policy fellowships embedded within national ministries. At one table, Dr. Koulibaly from Mali proposed a mobile solar classroom that traveled to nomadic herding communities. At another, Professor Rao from India suggested a dual certification allowing fellows to gain academic credentials recognized across regions. Mariam El-Sheikh from Cairo called for a trauma-informed training module for all mentors. By evening, we coalesced around 5 strategic pillars. 1. Mobility and access name asterisk, ensuring fellows can learn and teach across geographies without legal or financial barriers. 2. Holistic support asterisk, embedding mental health, digital literacy, and legal aid into every program. 3. Danmora 9 Cultural Sovereignty asterisk, positioning local knowledge keepers as co-authors of curricula. 4. Knowledge policy integration, Times Mothers asterisk, placing fellows in advisory roles within regional governance structures. 5. Knowledge Culti sustainable funding asterisk, securing multi-year endowments that outlast political cycles. We documented each pillar on giant mural boards, each delegate signing their commitment beneath the words. Outside, the cherry blossoms were in bloom, petals drifting on the breeze like pink snow. I walked among them with Lila, who had arrived to join the final discussions. You've come far, she said softly, staring upward. I nodded. But this feels like the beginning of another journey. She took my hand. We'll walk it together. I squeezed her fingers. Together. The final day of the retreat concluded with a signing ceremony. The Sabotaged UNESCO Global Equity Compact. A document co-authored by Bridgefire, UNESCO, and regional partners, committing all signatories to the 5 pillars and to annual public reporting. As I held the pen above the parchment, I thought of the letters I wrote as a teenager, letters never sent, messages stashed away in drawers. I thought of Mum's worried face, of Lila's betrayals and apologies, of Zara's unwavering faith, and I felt the tremor of nerves I always got before endings. Because every ending whispered of new beginnings. I signed. Then Lila, then our regional chairs, then UNESCO's director. Applause rippled through the hall. That evening we gathered in the rooftop garden above our office, lanterns swaying in the breeze. A global potluck, jollof rice from Nigeria, dumplings from China, feijoada from Brazil, shepherd's pie from the UK. We raised glasses of sparkling elderflower cordial. I tapped my flute for silence. To every no that became our next yes, I began, to the phoenix in each of us, and to the flame we pass forward. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose. And I realized, for the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath. Back in my flat that night, I sat at my desk, the glow of fairy lights around my bookshelf. I opened a fresh document. Part 12, The Compact and the Road Ahead. I typed. In a world of shifting borders and uncertain funding, our greatest asset is the trust we build. One fellowship, one conversation, one shared meal at a time. I saved the draft with a quiet sense of completion. Only one part remained. Part 13. The final chapter, where roots meet wings, where endings beget legacies, and where every story converges on a simple truth. Reclamation is forever open. I closed my laptop, breathing deeply, and I waited for dawn. The dawn after the signing ceremony arrived in a swirl of golden light. London's skyline glowed softly as I stood at the window of my new office. Larger, brighter, alive with framed letters, global maps, and the kinetic sculpture from our strategic retreat. I could still feel the vibrancy of the rooftop toast, the laughter of partners who had become friends, the petals of cherry blossoms drifting across our courtyard. And I realized, everything we had built, every mile traveled, and every obstacle overcome led us to this final chapter. I didn't believe in neat endings, but I believed in moments of convergence, where past and future met in a single resonant heartbeat. And so I began by turning back to where it all started, my childhood room in York, with its yellowed vision board and the poster of Oxford's Bodleian Library. I remembered the fear that gnawing in my chest when I first opened that rejection letter, the sense that a single word, no, could erase a lifetime of effort. And I remembered the young Kala, determined, wounded, dream-filled, ready to challenge a world that didn't yet see her. But I also remembered Lila, my sister, whose jealousy sparked the initial flames of sabotage, who thought that dimming my light would elevate her own, who unleashed a betrayal that nearly broke me. And yet, through her own journey of remorse, rebuilding, and service, she taught me the power of radical grace. She became the living proof that people can change, that bridges can be rebuilt from the ruins of resentment. Her final gift, returning my stolen essay, was both a gesture of apology and a symbol that even the tools of harm can be reclaimed for creation. The Phoenix Fellowship had soared far beyond its original remit. What began as a single endowment in Lila's name became a constellation of hope. First-generation scholars, vocational learners, mental health advocates, expunged students, global ambassadors. I thought of Zara Khan, the inaugural scholar whose tutoring app now powers free education platforms across Europe. Of Jordi Adebayo, who turned urban farming into a community nutrition revolution. Of Misha Patel, whose dyslexia app secured her place on a university board. Of Darren O'Connell, the expelled student who co-led our Reclaimers program and now teaches resilience workshops worldwide. Their stories were not footnotes. They were the living chapters of an ever-expanding narrative. And then there were the unsung, the siblings who reconnected at our sibling summits, the mentors who volunteered as Backers Circle ambassadors, the community liaisons in Accra, Delhi, and Jakarta who fine-tuned our global pilot, the students in rural Pakistan whose solar classrooms now light evening study sessions, the nomadic herders in Mongolia whose mobile labs ignited dreams of engineering. Each was a testament to the idea that no rejection is truly final, only a pause before a new possibility emerges. I penned the first lines of Part 13 not as a near conclusion, but as an invitation. An invitation to every reader, every viewer, every young woman who felt sidelined to step into her own power. I wrote, "Today we stand at the crossroads of legacy and possibility. The phoenix does not rise once and fade. She rises again and again, each time stronger, more radiant, fueled by the wisdom of countless rebirths." Then I recounted the early days, my triple shifts to save rent, my nights drafting essays by candlelight, the raw sting of Mum's tears when I told her the scholarship was gone. I described the spark that led me to micro-endowments, the spark that ignited Bridgefire with Zara's partnership, the spark that turned social media setbacks into viral movements. I wrote about the legal battles with Lila, not to villainize her, but to show the alchemy of reconciliation. I wrote about that viral video, my vulnerability laid bare, that reframed our narrative from scandal to solidarity. I wove in the policies passed in Parliament, the keynotes delivered at Oxford and Harvard, the OBE pinned at Buckingham Palace, the Center for Access and Equity named in my honor. But most of all, I honored the people. The policymakers who embraced our equity compact, the university chairs who revised admissions criteria, the parents who wept with relief at internship placements for their children, the students who found in Bridgefire not only funding, but a chorus of voices affirming their worth. The next section of the draft was a love letter to Lila. I acknowledged her bravery in stepping onto live television to own her mistakes. I celebrated her emergence as a co-founder of Flint and Feather, her leadership in vocational grants, her courage in co-writing our joint book. I thanked her for showing me that forgiveness is a practice, not a preset choice. And I dedicated the chapter to the paradox of sisterhood, that our greatest wounds can become our greatest strengths. I outlined the final pillar of our global program, perpetual reclamation. The idea that every project, every endowment, every policy must be designed to outlast its founders, to stand as an evergreen testament to second chances. We mapped out 5-year reviews, decadal summits, mentorship chains that stretch across generations. I envisioned a future where 50,000 fellows and counting carry the torch of equity forward, each igniting new sparks in their communities. Then I paused. It felt solemn, almost ritualistic, to pen the final lines. I reread the instructions I'd given myself. No flashbacks unless necessary. No abrupt jumps. Keep the timeline tight. End with the required special message. So I wove a final scene. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood at the edge of Stonehenge, the prehistoric stones rising like sentinels against the dawn. I was there with Lila, Zara, Mum, and a handful of fellows, celebrating the launch of our Landscape of Learning initiative, an outdoor earth science curriculum that paired ancient sites with modern ecological studies. As the sun climbed, we laid our hands on the cold stones, feeling the pulse of history beneath our palms. Lila looked at me and smiled, a warm, fearless smile. "We made something good," she said. I nodded, tears in my eyes. We made something lasting. Behind us, the fellows unfurled a banner, chimes asterisk, every rejection a new horizon, asterisk. And in that moment, I heard again the voice of the young woman in York, whispering, "You belong." Because she did. We all did. I closed my journal, exhaled deeply, and typed the final 2 lines. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. And with that, I saved the chapter, not as an ending, but as a bridge to the next horizon. Because the true Phoenix Fellowship is forever rising, and our story is never truly finished.